This week on To the Contrary.
First, sexism scandals and the technology industry. Then, the president warns off thousands of illegal immigrant children and teens. Behind the headlines, the global spread of fertility decline.
Welcome to the Contrary, a discussion of news and social trends from diverse perspectives. Up first, sexism and technology.
A frat-like culture could be sabotaging efforts to attract, retain, and promote women in technology. Yet another sexism scandal is rocking the industry. Dating app Tinder is being sued for sexual harassment and discrimination by a former marketing executive. She alleges her boss stripped her of co-founder status, saying having a, quote, 24-year-old girl, end quote, with that title made the company seem like a joke. The suit also charges her boss insulted her in front of the CEO, calling her a whore. It's just the latest in a string of similar cases. Earlier this year, the CEO of Radium One was convicted of domestic violence. And last month, the CEO of Snapchat, a picture-sharing app, was outed as a chauvinist when misogynistic emails from his college days surfaced.
So Kim Gandy, Google and Facebook recently released information showing they have very few women at or near the top. Is the frat culture the reason for this?
Well, you know, there definitely has been a sense that women were not particularly welcome in the high-tech industry. But Google and Facebook and Yahoo have all made concerted efforts recently to have more women in top positions, and I think that's going to be helpful.
I think it is unfortunate that there is this frat mentality. It's a young man's game, so to speak. And there are women who are in this industry, and I think they need to be respected and recognized.
Bonnie, it's long been documented that women have a civilizing effect on men. So men, especially young men, without women around, misbehave.
I think with the numbers, the low numbers of women in the technology industry, that's due to low numbers of young girls and young women actually going into STEM-related fields. Let's look at science, technology, engineering, and math. We need more girls pursuing careers in those fields.
Yeah, but we've also had studies showing that a lot of them go in and leave because of the atmosphere. So I, 15 or more years ago, did a story at Carnegie Mellon University's School of Computer Science. They had a special program to bring a whole lot of young women of color into computer science. They brought them in, they got their degrees, they went out in the world, and they got jobs. And then 5 years ago or so, I saw a study showing the industry didn't retain them. And these are the same young guys who, you know, we talked about in another venue. These are the young guys who are being more involved fathers. What's the disconnect between young men getting hipper about male-female relationships at home and just as ignorant as the 50s when it comes to the workplace?
Well, again, it goes to that bro-like culture of, you know, this is a guy's club here. We do what we do, much like in college when they were all majors together. I was an engineering major in college, and I dropped out because actually I was swayed the other way. I was told that it's better for you to pursue this easier field. You'll finish college quicker, and hey, you'll have a better gig in politics. I was swayed by my superiors, by actual advisors, and I had the marks, but I was surrounded by males. I was a strong personality, though. I was going to stick in if I wanted to and drop out if I wanted to. But again, I know what you're saying about these girls, and these girls are sort of feeling like they're alone in this thing, and it's because the guys make it that way.
It's very hard in any men's field, but if you have a men's field that have developed their own young men's culture, it's going to be harder. And I think what you said about retaining these women gets back to young girls who see this as a field they're very interested in, often very adept in, but just like you, turn away from it because nobody wants to be in that kind of uncomfortable atmosphere.
Yeah, I mean, I'm appalled by this behavior, and particularly since my son does want to go into the tech field, and I would like to think I raised him to be a better young man than what I'm hearing these guys are doing. But we definitely need to have more women to be in the field in order to tame the behavior, because I think part of it is they feel if there aren't women around, which is crazy to think that way, but they feel, well, we're guys and we can do what we want, and, you know, we can get away with it. and it's not acceptable.
I mean, I don't know. I guess I live in just such a completely different world, and it's a small world, and it's my own world, and it's populated with a lot of women because of the work that I do. But I just can't believe that guys who are in their 20s now, so they were born, you know, just before a few years before the millennium, are still being raised thinking they can do this. What are their mothers and fathers teaching them?
You know,
I mean, where does it come from?
It's the minority who are that way. And I think, you know, in any generation, you're going to have a minority of people who haven't caught up with the times. I think one of the things that's different is you have a lot of companies that are being run by 19 and 20-year-olds. They don't have the maturity to make business decisions in the way that they might if they were 27 or 28.
Well, that's absolutely true, but why haven't they been, I mean, they talk about young people not seeing color the way older generations do. I don't see it. I never did, because I went in the 60s to a private school in New York City that was, as we said back then, it shows you how old I am, integrated. Now it would be, you know, diverse or multicultural. But I grew up with people of all different colors in my school. So I'm thinking if boys are growing up thinking girls are equal, then why do they get into the workforce? And some of them, you're right, it's a minority. We should remember it's a minority. But where do some of them come off with the idea that they can call a female working with them a whore?
Well, isn't it lovely? They can live in two worlds. They can pretend to be fathers and, in fact, be good fathers. And then they can go to work and be good old boys or good young boys again. I think it says a lot about the frat culture and about what it will take to disengage it. Remember, we also see growing rape on campus, growing sexual harassment on campus. These are of a piece.
And how do we change it? I mean, any ideas?
Well, there was nobody in my corner 10 years ago, and now there's girls who code, there's women who code groups, and they're all over. They're sprouting up everywhere, and they're women developers, engineers coming together and kind of forming sisterhoods, and they're everywhere beyond Silicon Valley now, and I think that's hopeful because it's women helping women.
Yeah.
And it will also be to their advantage if the men who are in the majority of men who do behave well to really bring these guys aside and say, this is unacceptable. This is not what we need to represent, you know, as an industry or as men.
It's part of building a bystander culture around whether it's sexual assault, sexual harassment, domestic violence, so that men who observe this and women speak up and say, hey, it's not okay.
People don't think that rape is rampant in this nerd valley, as some people call it, right? They typically think it's more rampant on Wall Street, as we saw in the movie Wolf on Wall Street. So, you know, I think it's unexpected, and now that there's some awareness to it, it'll be good.
All right, keep pushing that awareness. Let us know what you think. Please follow me on Twitter at Bonnie Bay. From technology to immigration.
President Obama told Central American parents this week to stop sending their children to the border. The president will formally request $2 billion and approval from Congress to deport thousands of unaccompanied children who illegally cross the southwest border. 52,000 Central American minors have been detained since October, creating what's being called a humanitarian crisis. Many of the children are fleeing violence and believe they'll be given permission to stay. Frustrated with an unclear, broken system and House Republicans for failure to pass an immigration bill, the president also announced he plans to take executive action whenever possible to address immigration.
Congresswoman Norton, first I want to know, is Congress going to approve this $2 billion? And secondly, I want to know where the president find this money. That's a lot of money that could be doing a lot of other things.
Yeah, but you got to take care of this crisis. I think the president has the most awful dilemma. If you came from a country that is contiguous to the United States, like Canada or Mexico, you'd be turned right around, young or old, and be sent back. But from non-contiguous countries, thanks to President George W. Bush, then you could come. This had nothing to do, I shouldn't say it had nothing to do, it had very little to do with the dreamer mentality. Because if that were the case, they would have come when it was at its height. When it was at its height, we didn't see them.
Well, they're responding to problems in their own. You know,
yes.
Guatemala
yes.
is a wreck right now. It's full of crime. Honduras is you know, a lot of the crime is moving up from Colombia. A lot of the drug crime is moving north to countries where it wasn't 5 or 10 years ago. So this is chaos at home.
It is.
But under the 1994 UN meeting on population and development, all countries agreed to be responsible for their own populations. We agreed to that, which we rarely agree to UN mandates or treaties or rules, and yet nobody else is doing it.
Well, remember, he can't do anything about those who come. Law says they have to be processed in a certain way.
Why not change the law?
But it's going to be hard to get consensus on that.
Why?
What he can do.
But why would it be hard? This would be the Democrats not wanting to agree to it, right?
The Democrats won't want to change a law that says children should be sent back to this crime and chaos. They won't want to do that. They will.
So they would rather take $2 billion that could go to poor Americans, including child immigrants.
The $2 billion will go to both control the border and to processing the children. What the president has to do, though, is send a message, a deterrent message out.
Well, he did.
Right now.
He sent that this
He's
week,
doing
right?
that, and he's sending people to these countries to say, don't risk your children's lives by sending them, because we will not be able to take care of them, and the law does not apply to them. But it's a horrible dilemma for any chief executive to be in the midst of.
I agree. It's a crisis. I mean, we saw a spike. In the normal year, we see 5,000 kids coming over like this. In 6 months, we saw 53,000. This is a crisis. There's no doubt about it. The $2 billion I'm very concerned about. What is it really going to go to? We haven't really been fully told by President Obama in his ask for it. So I'll be interested to see what Congress does with this.
Just to house and feed and clothe.
Yeah, we know what it's going to be.
50,000 people.
I get it, but he's already sent an influx of judges down to these 3 states to work on deportation as it is. So if we're actively deporting, why must we ask for so much money to take care of the existing
Because we have to take care of those, and you can't just deport them. They have to go through a process. It's going to be used for 2 things. One, in the border, he's taking people from elsewhere and sending them to try to close the border even more, and to take care of the children. So the Congress will not be able to say, hey, we don't know what this money is going to be used for.
Well, also,
I want to know what people of color here, especially lower income people of color, including Latinos and Latinas and African Americans, think when they see $2 billion appear on the horizon that could be going for food stamps, for unemployment, for job retraining for them.
Well, we're in a very precarious situation, and I know that we've always boasted about the fact we are the home of the free and the land of the brave, and we want everyone to come and be successful. But this is a situation where this type of environment does neglect those who are already here, and that is a concern because you have educational issues, you have financial issues. We are still trying to get through a recession, and joblessness is high. So to have more people coming in and having to deal with that, it does hurt the poor communities.
It doesn't hurt the poor communities at all. None of that money would go to food stamps. None of it would go to a single American. The only beef will be the Tea Party, because they will say it will raise the deficit.
But where is he taking it from, the $2 billion?
He's taking it from, we've got the money. The beef from the Republicans will be, you're adding to the deficit, and we don't do that even for humanitarian concerns.
Well, I mean, it is, don't you see from a non-member of Congress's perspective, I'm playing devil's advocate with you, that we've got the money, so you've got $2 billion you can find somewhere, and there's so many unmet social needs in this country.
The last people in the world who will believe that $2 billion would go for them if it were not going for children who have left chaos. The last people to believe that are people of color.
Yeah, it breaks my heart to see the pictures of these kids, but it's evidence of a broken immigration system in this country that the administration has been trying to fix. There have been a lot of efforts to fix it, and it's hit stonewall. And so there are families in chaotic situations. Many of them have relatives here. They're trying to reunite, in many cases, these children with their relatives in the U.S., and they finally gave up on an immigration reform that would let them do that, and they've just sent the kids hoping that they will somehow be reunited
Your idea of a solution?
The solutions are nowhere on the brink. Let's just put it that way. Both Congress and this president have been so partisan. They want their plans and they want it only. But the good news is Republicans just a couple days ago have come out saying they're willing now to work with the president on what might look good to at least tackle the crisis in the short term.
Okay,
and I think,
how, though?
And
in what way? To spend the $2
billion?
billion?
I think it's going to be spending. I think that's what's going to come first. And then we're going to have to really go piecemeal about this. We're going to have to see what the Senate wants, and then we'll come back to the House, and it'll probably be volleyball again.
All right. Please weigh in from your perspective.
Yeah, this is not an easy issue to deal with, and you know, with the Republicans stepping up to the plate, so to speak, you know, I hope we can come to a compromise. But it does concern me, as you mentioned to Delegate Norton, that, you know, there's money that we said we don't have, now we have, and not that I don't care about children and their safety in other countries, but we've got to come with better solutions than spending.
The House is the problem. My hat is off, frankly, to the bipartisanship of the Senate. When Republicans and Democrats got together and said something must be done. The problem here is the Tea Party House of Representatives don't want to do anything, even if there's a humanitarian crisis.
All right, behind the headlines, fertility decline. With mothers in developed countries having fewer children, many are concerned about what's called a baby bust. But is that anxiety just alarmism?
I'm not quite sure what it is about the human psychology that leads people to become excessively alarmed about population change.
Author and researcher Michael Teitelbaum says those fears, while loud, are not new. They go back to the ancient Greeks and keep coming around again and again.
For example, in the 1930s, fertility was low in Europe and in the U.S. and Canada, and there were lots of books published with awful, threatening titles like Twilight of Parenthood is one. And then along came World War II, and then the post-war baby boom wiped all of that concern out. But people then got worried about excessive population growth, too fast. And you had books published with titles like The Population Bomb. And then fertility turned down again.
In his New York Times op-ed piece titled Bye Bye Baby, Teitelbaum chronicles these fears to the present day. Today's books include What to Expect When No One's Expecting and The Empty Cradle. The fertility rate is down in most countries with the exception of some regions such as sub-Saharan Africa.
The U.S. nationally has relatively high fertility rates compared to most other advanced, developed, industrialized or post-industrial countries.
Many factors contribute to this global trend. Politics, religion, geography, and culture, among others, all play roles. But Teitelbaum says there are common themes.
One of them is increasing education and employment among women, which tends to set up a conflict, if you will, between work and family. A second factor is the availability of more effective, safe, contraceptive technologies, which really didn't appear until the 1960s.
Could a declining fertility rate actually be a good thing?
If fertility rates that are high decline to moderate or even low levels, the general pattern is health improves, particularly health of women. If they have many children and very short birth intervals between them, that tends to compromise women's health. Their education attainment of the children tends to increase.
With modern issues such as climate change and the threat of nuclear weapons, Teitelbaum says the age-old idea that population equals power is out of date. But people remain worried about the declining fertility rate. One big problem, they say, is there will not be enough young people to support retired people. The solution, according to Teitelbaum, is to change the retirement system.
If you have a retirement system that doesn't change with the changing demographic circumstances, you're going to run into really serious problems. The U.S. is actually pretty well positioned. It was ahead of the curve in addressing this issue in the 80s. There was a bipartisan commission that recommended changes in Social Security retirement age.
While fertility rates are low now in the Western Hemisphere, Teitelbaum says that's partially due to the recessions that affected the U.S. and Europe.
Very sensibly, young adults say this looks pretty risky as a time to get married, or certainly as a time to have a child. We're going to wait. And they defer both marriage and childbearing, and so you get this distortion in the annual fertility rates. When things stabilize, you get a return.
History has shown that fertility rates are cyclical.
If you look at the literature in the 30s, nobody writing in that time anticipated there would be a baby boom of the magnitude that occurred in the U.S.
So Darlene, when you factor in, as we showed in the graphic, that our fertility rate is 2.1, it's actually lower for women born in this country, but because of immigration adding 7 figures every year, we get to what is essentially replacement value, right. One in, one out. Right. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Should we be worried about it?
Well, I don't think this planet's going to run out of people anytime soon. You know, as the gentleman said, there are a number of reasons. Demographers don't necessarily know exactly why this is the way it is, but you know, there are decisions that are made with young people, particularly between the ages of 23 and 30, give or take, to not marry early, or if they marry, to not have children. You know, we're dealing with a generation behind us that are coming out of colleges and graduate schools and unable to find jobs. So I think they're at least being wise enough to say, maybe I should not have a child until economically I can afford to bring another mouth to feed into the family.
I see you nodding.
Yeah, well, you know, it's one of the things that causes me concern when we hear about, talk about increasing the retirement age even more, because that's one of the reasons that young people are having trouble finding jobs, is because people who are 65 or 66 or 67 are still in those jobs because of the gradually increasing retirement age. If we keep increasing the retirement age, there will continue to be fewer jobs available. What we need to do in terms of Social Security is raise the cap on the amount of earnings that you contribute through Social Security. Right now, there's a fairly low cap, and if you raise the cap on the amount of income that is subject to Social Security, so that high earners
so over 100 now
more.
It's what, in the high 90s, low, yeah, over
100,000
so
about. Yeah.
So raise it to 150 or something.
Yeah,
like that. You're saying,
or 200, and that would resolve the problem for close to 100 years, according to the.
I'm not too alarmed by this, to be honest. I don't think it's anything that signals let's change everything now. We've known our Social Security system's been broken for a long time, so if we can fix it, great. But I don't think this is alarming news. I think it's natural. This was going to happen. We saw something like this happen in the 30s, and you know, it's just human nature.
Alarmed. You're saying it's not alarming.
It's not alarming
Social Security system is broken.
Oh, that I'm alarmed by.
Okay,
but
so
the decline of global fertility,
okay.
Women choosing to hold off on having children. There are so many factors that contribute to that. We work now a lot more than our predecessors did, and I think that's a huge contributor.
I agree with you, because even as the demographer said, this has been cyclical. But this is what alarms me. You notice that this is global. And we're not just talking about this country and the countries that are rich. We're now talking about countries across the globe. Also global is the so-called income gap. One of the only ways you can affect your income is to reduce the number of children. And I think that's going to be happening for a number of years out. Then people are going to see that life is better. And I do agree you're going to have to look at not just the Social Security system, I couldn't agree more, but look at the way in which people save for retirement, because the system we're now depending on, the young take care of the old, is just not going to be there. And we now know how much time does it take to tell us that the richer a country becomes, the fewer children they're going to always have. Different way of taking care of ourselves.
And that's a good thing or a bad thing in your mind?
Well, overall, it's certainly good for women. Mm-hmm. because
I mean, could we resolve poverty, global poverty? And by the way, even though fertility rates are declining, we have what's called population momentum, where there are a lot of people in the age of reproduction. So global population is now 7 going on 9 billion by mid-century. So it's going to be a while before we start losing billions of I mean, it's not projected that we'll ever get back down to 5 billion or 4 billion or something that some scientists might say would be sustainable. So is that a good trend or a bad trend?
Well, we really do have to watch out about the capacity of the Earth to absorb people, and that now is being reduced by climate change. change. And I'm in a House of Representatives full of climate change deniers. That is the scariest part of being a member of Congress today.
All right, thank you. That's it for this edition. Please follow me on Twitter and visit our website, pbs.org/tothecontrary. Whether you agree or think to the contrary, see you next week.